You at a local grocer's, Harrow, North London, this morning.
How is social distancing panning out for you?
As you can see, it's fine.
No, we're hardly changing at all, because if you do that, then you give into it, sort of thing.
If you do that, you give into it. I think when you give in to coronavirus is the point when you're in the ICU and your lungs can't open and close anymore, to be honest. But maybe that's a bit too graphic. But
no, it's true. It's true. But I was thinking this, right? Is that, and it's not just that lady in Harrow. There have been other people who've been invoking the Dunkirk spirit and the Blitz spirit as a reason why you should keep wandering around, licking lampposts or whatever it is you do. On the one hand, it's completely idiotic, because the reason why the generations who defeated Nazism were able to was because of a huge amount of self-denial and collective action and thinking of the greater good. When it was the Blitz and it was a blackout, you couldn't go, oh, I'm going to flick my lights on and off in the name of personal freedom. So one, that's complete bullshit. But two, these people weren't even alive during World War II. Most born in the 1950s and the 1960s, which then got me thinking is, inshallah, we will get through this pandemic. Novara Media will return to the studios, maybe a couple of pounds heavier, maybe a little bit more haunted. Life will go on. We'll have kids. And then our kids will be the shitty generation constantly invoking coronavirus to justify their own crappy behavior. While we were like, hey, you weren't even there.
I wanted to talk about how this attitude isn't just, you know, it has come from the top, right? So Boris Johnson, just yesterday, he spoke and said, we'll get over this in 12 weeks and we will send coronavirus packing. Now, that was the kind of language that helped him in the general election. It sort of worked with him when what he was talking about was detaching from Europe. That was very much a political phenomenon. But you can't intimidate coronavirus. You can't stop the spread and catastrophic disaster of coronavirus by having, by telling it to fuck off and by telling it to go packing. It's a nonsense, and I think it is filtering down. Aaron.
Michael, I don't just think it's, that's true. It's not just, but it's not just the top. It's not just Boris Johnson. It's not just, down in street, it's the government. First, there's a broader cultural context of the war on terror. That's for 20 years. And people have basically, in George W. Bush in the days following 9/11 said, people need to keep on shopping. That's how you take these people on. That's how we win, is you go down to Walmart and you buy your groceries. And that metaphor has stuck. And that was a metaphor fundamentally for problems that weren't problems. Al-Qaeda ultimately wasn't an existential threat to the United States. It wasn't. They were bad. It was bad what happened on 9/11, but coronavirus could kill, if it was untreated, millions of Americans, hundreds of thousands of Americans. Very different proposition. And the idea that you don't alter behavior as a gesture of defiance. The equivalent here, if we're going to talk about the Blitz, is you've got the Luftwaffe flying over the East End. And like Ash says, rather than turning off your lights, you'd have a street party. And you'd say, well, I'm not going to let the Luftwaffe tell me how to live my life. This is insane. This is nutty. And I think it's the outgrowth of, I talked about already, the sort of 20-year cultural animus around the war on terror, but then also a certain understanding of freedom, which comes from Milton Friedman, Hayek. Now, most people have never heard of these guys, but it percolated through to a form of everyday common sense through the neoliberal counter-revolution, through Rupert Murdoch's son, through Margaret Thatcher, through Ronald Reagan. Freedom is smoking indoors. Who the fuck thinks freedom is smoking indoors? Ridiculous. But this is ultimately where you end up, a very nihilistic, very incoherent, often very self-defeating attitude, even when you're confronting problems like not just coronavirus, climate change. Julia Hartley-Brewer talks about, I want a 4-liter car, fuck it. Let's destroy the planet as quickly as possible. That's where it ends up, nihilism. And it's a very strange, distorted understanding of freedom, but we have to understand it as an outgrowth, like I said, a broader continuum, which is decades in the making.
So my question from that, sorry to barge in. My question from that is, the people we've seen on the video will still be, fighting coronavirus in a few weeks and maybe even a few months. What can society do to change their mind? And is the only option something that's a lot more state-led and enforced than we currently are seeing? I don't know, but I agree with you, Aaron. I'm not sure how this pans out in the long term when people really start to feel that freedom that they feel is completely what they're entitled to taken away from them.
Can I respond? Because it also sort of syncs up. There's somebody in the comments that said, you know, what is freedom really? And it ties into a really remarkably stupid comment we probably all saw on Twitter. Some guy said, you know, I survived rationing. I can survive coronavirus. You survived a scarcity of food because of rationing. And the point is, when you have a pandemic or a war or a major crisis of some kind, then the first thing is being able to survive. And you would voluntarily seek to compromise or limit your freedoms in order to survive. And it does speak to, you know, I don't like to use that word, but boomers. There has been such an absence, a historical absence of these kinds of challenges for so long that, you know, many people have lost the sort of psychological architecture by which to understand it. You know, the last pandemic of this scale was 100 years ago. It was in 1918. Second World War finishes in 1945. Since then, there have been no real existential threats. So, I mean, something for the historians of the future to talk about, I guess.